He was a police dog, trained for war on the streets. But when his partner made the ultimate sacrifice, his most important mission was just beginning. This is the story of a weapon who had to learn to be a guardian, and a family who had to learn that loyalty never dies. In the world of law enforcement, some partnerships are forged in absolute, unspoken trust. The bond between Sergeant David Miller and his canine partner Kaiser was the stuff of legend. On the streets, they were a perfect synthesis of man and animal, instinct and intellect, moving as one through the city's darkest corners. Kaiser was a shield, a shadow, a finely tuned instrument of justice. But at home, the uniform came off and the weapon vanished. He was just a dog who adored his family. The most important part of his day wasn't the thrill of the chase, but the moment Sergeant Miller walked through the door and his son, Leo, would run to greet them both. In that moment, Kaiser wasn't a police dog, he was a family member, watching over his two favorite people in the world, his tail wagging in the quiet peace of a home he had helped to keep safe. It was a perfect balance, a life of duty and devotion, a balance that was about to be shattered forever. But in a life built on the front lines, the line is designed to be broken. Every shift begins with a quiet prayer for a safe return, a prayer that hangs in the air, fragile and hopeful, but a prayer that is not always answered. The call didn't come over a police radio, crackling with static and codes. It came to the front door, a silent, formal procession of blue. Two of Sergeant Miller's closest colleagues, men who had shared laughter with him over coffee just that morning, now stood on his porch, their faces etched with a grief so profound it seemed to steal the very oxygen from the air. Their uniforms, usually a symbol of unshakable strength, seemed to hang on them like ill-fitting costumes, cloaks of sorrow they were forced to wear. Hannah Miller saw them through the living room window, and in that single, heart-stopping instant, her world bifurcated into a before and an after. She knew. A wife of a cop always knows what that particular visit means. The world didn't shatter with a scream. It dissolved into a silent, colorless, high-pitched hum inside her own head. The portrait of their perfect life, once so vibrant, was instantly reduced to ash. Sergeant David Miller, a husband, a father, and a hero, had responded to his last call. He had made the ultimate sacrifice, leaving behind not just a void, but a silence so dense and heavy it felt like a physical presence in the house. And miles away at the station, another being felt the shift without understanding the reason. Kaiser, brought back in a different patrol car by a stranger, refused to leave the vehicle. He sat perfectly still, his ears twitching at every familiar sound, his eyes locked on the door his partner was supposed to walk through. He could smell the lingering scent of Miller on the seat, a scent now mixed with the unfamiliar, acrid smell of tragedy and the sorrow of other officers. He didn't know the words dead or gone. He only knew one thing. His partner went into a building, and he did not come out. The mission was not over. The shift had not ended, and so he waited. For a soldier, the battlefield is chaos. But it is a structured chaos. There are rules, objectives, a clear chain of command. The most terrifying place for a soldier is not the war zone, but the world after the war ends. A few days after the funeral, a ceremony of crisp uniforms, folded flags, and a grief too vast to be contained, Kaiser was officially retired. The decision was made with compassionate intentions. He would live out his days with the family he had helped protect. But no one explained the new rules to him. No one told him the war was over. The transition was a quiet violence to his senses. The familiar scent of the patrol car's worn leather and stale coffee was replaced by the overwhelming smell of Hannah's grief and the floral perfume of well-meaning visitors. His world, once a landscape of concrete, asphalt, and the thrilling scent of a trail, was now confined to a soft rug, a manicured lawn, and four walls that felt more like a prison than a home. He was given a new bed, soft and plush, but he would often ignore it, choosing instead to lie on the cold, hard floor by the front door, the position a sentinel takes. He was given toys, but he would mouth them once before dropping them, his instincts searching for the worn-down bite sleeve of training, not the squeak of a rubber ball. He would watch young Leo play, his mind unable to reconcile the small, fragile boy with the clear, defined mission of protection. He would see Hannah move through the house like a phantom, her eyes red-rimmed and empty, and his training would scream threat assessment, but the threat was an invisible enemy called sorrow. He was a weapon without a target, a partner without a commander. Every instinct, every fiber of his being, honed by years of rigorous training, was now useless. He wasn't living, he was waiting. Waiting for the command that would give him purpose again, a command that would never come from the only voice that mattered. A soldier without a mission will invent one. An instinct, when denied its purpose, will carve its own path. For Kaiser, the waiting ended when a new self-assigned directive crystallized in his mind. His commander was gone. Therefore, the final standing order must be to protect the commander's most valuable assets, his family. It was not a thought, it was a certainty, as deeply ingrained as the command to attack or stand down. His grief, too complex to be processed as sadness, was channeled into the one thing he understood: unwavering, hyper-vigilant duty. His world shrank to the perimeter of the house and the daily routine of its occupants. He began to clear the house every morning, room by room, just as he and Miller had cleared countless abandoned buildings. He would position himself in the hallway, a central point from which he could observe every entrance and exit. The mailman, once a familiar presence, was now reclassified as an unknown intruder approaching the perimeter, met with a low, rumbling growl that vibrated from deep in his chest. When Hannah took Leo to the park, Kaiser would circle them relentlessly, his eyes scanning the faces of other parents, his body a tense, coiled spring ready to intercept any perceived threat. For Leo, this new, ever-present shadow was a comfort, a furry, living link to the father he missed. But for Hannah, it was torture. Every act of protection was a deafening echo of the life she had lost. The dog's intense focus was a constant, living monument to her husband's dangerous profession. She didn't see a guardian fulfilling a sacred duty. She saw a weapon that had forgotten the war was over, a painful, breathing reminder of the world that had taken her husband from her. And she was beginning to fear that reminder. Grief is a selfish entity. It consumes all the oxygen in a room, leaving little for anyone else to breathe. And in the Miller house, two powerful griefs were on a collision course. Hannah's was a human sorrow, a maelstrom of memories, what-ifs, and a future stolen. Kaiser's was a canine sorrow, a silent, unwavering loyalty now aimed at ghosts, a purpose burning so brightly it was blinding. The breaking point arrived on a Tuesday night, exactly 1 month since David's death. The date itself hung in the air, heavy and unspoken. A fierce thunderstorm was raging outside, the booms of thunder rattling the windows, mimicking the sounds of a world Kaiser was trained to operate in. A tree branch, tossed by the wind, scraped loudly against the living room window. In an instant, Kaiser was on his feet, hackles raised, a deep, guttural bark erupting from him, a sound not of fear, but of pure, protective aggression. It was the bark he used for a suspect, for a real and present danger. And for Hannah, that sound was the final crack in her fragile composure. It wasn't just a bark. It was the sound of her husband's job, the sound of danger, the sound of the world that had made her a widow. All the pain, the frustration, and the suffocating loneliness of the past month erupted in a single desperate cry. "Stop it!" she screamed, her voice raw with an anguish that shocked even herself. "Just stop! He's gone, Kaiser! David is gone! Your job is over!" The words, meaningless in their vocabulary, were devastating in their emotional force. Kaiser flinched as if struck. The aggressive posture vanished, replaced by a sudden, profound confusion. He lowered his head, his tail tucking between his legs, and retreated to a corner, his body trembling. He had faced down armed men without an ounce of fear, but the raw, incomprehensible pain in Hannah's voice had broken through his training, his instinct, and his purpose. He had failed his new mission. He had caused distress to the very person he was sworn to protect, and he had absolutely no idea why. After the storm of words, a silence even heavier than before descended upon the house. Hannah sat on the sofa, her anger instantly replaced by a wave of crushing guilt. She hadn't yelled at a dog, she had yelled at the last living piece of her husband's professional life, a fellow mourner who couldn't speak back. Kaiser remained in the corner, a portrait of dejection, his proud spirit seemingly extinguished. He had received a command he finally understood, stop, but in obeying it, he had lost the very last thread of his purpose. Later that night, as Hannah tucked her son Leo into bed, the little boy was unusually quiet. He looked from his mother's tired, tear-streaked face to the dark corner of the hallway where Kaiser was still lying. Then, with the simple, unadorned clarity that only a child possesses, he spoke. "Mommy," he whispered, his voice small but certain, "you were wrong." Hannah looked at him, confused. "What do you mean, sweetie?" "Kaiser isn't being bad," Leo continued, his eyes serious. "He's just doing his job, Daddy's job." He paused, trying to find the right words. "When Daddy went to work, he protected people. Now that Daddy's not here, Kaiser thinks it's his turn to protect us, for him. He's not being mean to the mailman, he's just making sure the house is safe. He's not being loud, he's just telling the monsters to stay away." He looked at his mother, his small face filled with a wisdom far beyond his years. "He misses him too, you know." The simple, profound truth of her child's words landed in Hannah's heart with the force of a physical blow. It was a translation from a language of barks and growls into a language of love and duty. In her own all-consuming grief, she had seen Kaiser's actions as a painful reminder of the past, but Leo, in his innocence, saw them for what they truly were, a beautiful, heartbreaking continuation of a promise. The dog wasn't stuck in the past, he was trying to secure the future, the only way he knew how. Sometimes the most profound truths come from the smallest voices. Leo's words didn't just explain the dog's behavior, they unlocked a door in Hannah's heart that she had barricaded shut with her own sorrow. She had been so focused on what she had lost that she failed to see what she still had. Not a pet, not a reminder of a painful past, but a partner in grief. A silent, loyal guardian who was carrying the weight of the same loss, just in a different language. She walked slowly out of her son's room and into the dimly lit living room. Kaiser was still in the corner, a dark shape of misery. He lifted his head as she approached, his eyes wary, expecting another reprimand. But instead of anger, he saw something new on her face. He saw understanding. he saw kinship. Hannah knelt on the floor in front of him, the way her husband used to. She didn't say a word. She simply reached out a trembling hand and rested it on his head. At her touch, the dog's stoic composure finally broke. A low, mournful whine escaped his throat, a sound of pure, unadulterated grief that he had held back for weeks. It was the sound of a soldier finally admitting he was wounded. And as he leaned his heavy head against her, Hannah finally let go. The tears she had been fighting back, the strong facade she had maintained for her son, all of it crumbled. She wrapped her arms around the powerful dog, burying her face in his thick fur, and wept. They were not a woman and a dog. They were two souls, a widow and a partnerless canine, finally sharing the same crushing weight of their loss. In that shared silence, punctuated only by their quiet sobs, the healing of the Miller family finally, truly began. Healing is not a destination, it is a journey. And the journey of the Miller family began not with forgetting, but with remembering in a new way. The house, once a museum of loss, slowly began to feel like a home again. The change was not loud or dramatic. It was a series of quiet, profound shifts. Kaiser was no longer confined to a corner. He was reinstated as the heart of the home, his presence a comforting weight rather than a painful reminder. He still performed his duties, but they were different now. His morning clearance of the house was met with a soft, "Good morning, Sergeant," from Hannah. His protective watch over Leo was now a shared ritual, with Hannah sitting beside them in the park, reading a book, finding peace in his vigilance instead of fear. The low growl at the mailman was gently corrected, not with anger, but with a reassuring touch and the words, "It's okay, partner, we're safe." One afternoon, Hannah opened the polished wooden box that held her husband's folded flag and his badge. Beside them, she placed Kaiser's old, worn leather service collar. It was not a shrine to what was lost, but an altar to what had endured. Loyalty, duty, and a love that transcended death. Kaiser, sensing the solemnity of the moment, rested his head on her lap, his quiet presence a shared acknowledgement of their hero. He was still on duty. He would always be on duty. But his mission was no longer a frantic, lonely battle against the ghosts of the past. It was a quiet, steady watch over the future. He was no longer just a canine unit. He was a father's last promise, a husband's living legacy, and a son's furry, steadfast guardian. This was his last and most important assignment. This was Sergeant Kaiser's last shift. In the quiet contract between a human and an animal, there are vows that are never spoken, but are unbreakable. They are vows of loyalty, of protection, of a love that asks for nothing but to serve. The story of Kaiser is a testament to the fact that duty does not end when a uniform is put away, and that the deepest griefs are often born in the most profound silence. It reminds us that healing doesn't always come from moving on, but from finding a new way to hold on, and that the greatest heroes are often the ones who continue their watch long after the battle is over. This is the silent chord. We believe that the most powerful promises are the ones that are never spoken aloud. If this story struck a chord with you, subscribe and join a community that listens to the silence.